Half-Life Alyx isn't the Half-Life 2 of VR. For every good thing about the game, there is a flaw. The graphics are great, but the combat is boring. The physics system is amazing, but there is nowhere to mess around with them. The story is really interesting, and there are a bunch of cool set pieces, but the play movement is slow and boring, and there isn't even a jump button. Don't get me wrong, I think for its time, it was a top tier VR game, and it still can be jaw-dropping and fun now. But its age has really started to show over the years. Help me hit 2K before the year ends, onto the video. But why was it good in the first place? Half-Life 1 was a revolutionary title from 1998. It was one of the first fully 3D shooter games, and when it came out, it was probably the most polished yet. The game was amazing and led to many different titles modifying the game's engine, and the game's incredible movement tech was implemented in many different games like Counter-Strike and other smaller projects. The game's bugged movement allowed moves like b-hopping and surfing. Then in 2004, the even more legendary Half-Life 2 released, which had reinvented what it meant to create a video game. Its realistic physics engine was unlike any other, and the game's story was engaging and gripping. The gravity gun in Half-Life 2 was revolutionary. It lets you manipulate the props around the stage and even use them to fling at enemies. It lets the player play around with the game's physics in a way that affects how they play the game. So you can solve puzzles, kill enemies with all the random props scattered around. This made the game feel alive and full. It was a good balance between linear game progression and a sandbox where you could do whatever you want. This title would be turned into the source engine that would be used in Counter-Strike, Gmod, and Team Fortress 2. These two Half-Life games completely revolutionized gaming, and the innovation is still felt today. Half-Life Alyx introduced the world of VR to amazing realistic physics and immersion unmatched. It should have been the Half-Life 2 of VR, except another game did both these things but better. That game was Boneworks. When you think of a Half-Life game, you think of a realistic and robust physics engine and funky movement that is so satisfying to abuse. Boneworks is that game for VR. It came out a couple months before Half-Life Alyx and aged so much better. The player has a full physical body instead of floating hands. You could jump and punch things, move things around, climb things, shoot things. It really was the game that Half-Life Alyx should have been. And it really was more like Half-Life than an actual Half-Life game. Half-Life Alyx just does not hit the same nowadays, as we have titles like Bone Lab, The Walking Dead, Clone Drone, Into the Radius, all titles that do things better than Half-Life Alyx. The game is still definitely good, but its levels are flawed and the combat is slow. Let me explain. The levels in HLA are either extremely straightforward, where you just walk in one direction and follow the curves of the level, or absolutely confusing. And they feel like a big maze where you travel in circles. The puzzles are either brain dead easy or absolutely mind-bending and confusing. The set pieces are cool in concept, but in practice it's just clunky and annoying. Like there's all this crazy stuff in front of you that you are forced to stand there and watch. Boneworks was so fun because it was so free, and you were dropped into a level and had to find your way to the end, whether that be by the obvious path or some completely broken and unintended path. Like I said before, the combat here is greatly flawed. All you have at your disposal in every combat situation are a variety of handguns that you can materialize into your hand, or some random object to hit head grabs with. That's all. You can't do any melee attacks or use two-handed weapons. Melee is probably the best combat mechanic when done right. Saints and Sinners is the gold standard. Its perfect weighty combat focused around stabbing and clubbing feels amazing when you combine that with being able to grab the zombies. It leads to the most satisfying combat in VR. It doesn't just stop there. The guns are also amazing. They feel realistic and weighted. The pistols don't have those fancy aiming reticles that just clutter up your combat. You get an eye in sight and have to rely on your own aim. Combined with all the creative options available like mines or throwing your knives, results in a more fleshed out combat system that feels almost like a puzzle, as you have very limited resources and really have to use everything at your disposal. In HLA, you see an enemy, you point and click. If that didn't kill it, aim at a red barrel or a shiny spot on the enemy. While your resources are limited, you don't have to work for it, as you just find ammo on the ground. This means when you run out of ammo, instead of getting creative, you just walk around till you find more ammo and keep using your gun. The main problem I have with HLA is that it plays it too safe. The previous Half-Life games were known for pushing the limits of the hardware at the time. Sure, it looks great and the physics work, but between the floating hands, extremely safe and slow movement, the game feels really dated. Into the Radius is an example of how Half-Life Alyx could have been. That game has a similar feel. Both are story games, and are very grounded games that don't have many dynamic moments. The first thing Into the Radius does better is more combat options. First of all, you have access to melee attacks. The knife is a horrible weapon when it comes to stabbing, but at least you have the option when you run out of ammo. Another interaction with the knife is throwing. When you don't want to make a loud gunshot, you can throw a knife. This greatly improves the depth of the combat. Just a simple inclusion can make a world of difference. Not only that, the player has access to dual wielding, true two-handed guns, weapon modification and cleaning. Into the Radius's combat makes Life Alyx look like a tech demo. Into the Radius is much more immersive. You have a full body instead of disembodied hands. Instead of opening up a weapon menu, you physically grab items off your arms and chest, or take your bag and larger weapons off your shoulders. It might seem trivial, but it is more engaging to fumble for an item while in combat than to press a button to robotically summon it. There are many things that Into the Radius does better. For one, the maps are open world and are exploration and looting based. Instead of focusing mostly on animation and visual polish, Into the Radius makes all of the gameplay systems as fun and in-depth as possible. It has stamina and hunger mechanics, insane monsters instead of just zombie shooter guys and head crabs. One of the things that Life Alyx has going for it is that it was one of the first Source 2 games. You might think that Source 2 was made for the game, but it was said that it was being developed before Life Alyx was planned. The thing that sucks about the game is that even though it's in the Source 2 engine, the player character is missing the usual quirks as normal. You can't bunny hop or surf. A modified version of the game does have surf, and that's really disappointing. The movement tech had so much potential, being in one of the most legendary engines in terms of movement. The small details in this game are amazing and are fun to notice, like all the realistic sounds on items, the shaders on the bottle that looks like actual water sloshing around inside them, and various different interactions. It's neat that there are working light switches, and that you can kill these head crabs through their cages, but no matter how much polish you put on the game, you still cannot ignore the underlying issues. All of the other stuff does not matter, as long as the game is fun, but I don't think it is. The first time I picked up the game was when I first got my PC. I had the Quest 2 for several years at that point and grew my VR experience. I played games like Bone Lab, Saints and Sinners, and Blade and Sorcery. By the time I got the chance to play Life Alyx, I was already acclimated to VR's most intense experiences and wanted more. I kept hearing all this stuff about the game being a must-play title, the greatest VR game ever. To say I was underwhelmed is an understatement. It's all the same with games like VR Chat. You see clips of YouTubers acting like the most shallow VR experiences are the most intense and amazing things ever. My recommendation for anyone who hasn't tried VR yet and wants to try Life Alyx is to play it as soon as you can. I think it would be an amazing first game and can get you introduced, but going back to play it now can be a drag. Imagine your first VR game was Bone Lab. It's just such an amazing game with unmatched physics and enjoyability. There's a bunch of cool moments and intense battles. You make your way through a tightly packed campaign with infinite different ways you can get through it. The perfectly integrated modding support where you can take your experience further, multiplayer, new campaigns, hundreds of new weapons and NPCs, sandboxes to mess around with it, and absolute freedom where you decide what type of game you play. Will it be as the heavy, pulverizing enemies in combat trials, or is Arthur Ford messing around with the sandboxes? The game has all of its systems finely tuned above the competition. The gunplay is better than most shooter VR games, the story is more engaging than most story VR games, the parkour and movement is only matched by its predecessor Boneworks. It's a perfectly rounded out game. You start with the best, and then you have to play the average VR games. They would be awful in comparison. It would be like from doing heroin to doing Benadryl. Just bottom of the barrel. That's what Life Alyx felt like to me. I did not realize how good I had it with Bone Lab until I tried Life Alyx. That's how natural and amazing Bone Lab was. I remember when I first played HLA, I was looking around at stuff in awe of the graphics, trying out the physics, but graphics and physics cannot carry a game alone. Then I saw the boring cutscenes that couldn't be skipped. It was still cool, but I was trying to play fast-paced, running through the levels at my own pace, only to have my handheld and got yanked back as I still had a cutscene to watch. This didn't happen in Bone Lab, where you were free to find skips and run past every enemy. The slow boy movement only made the game feel slower. The only way to remedy is to spam teleport. Teleporting is a good option, but both locomotion styles should be balanced, as I do not want to spam a button and zip around. Teleporting is probably the least immersive movement style in VR. It has its reasons to be here, but it feels mandatory if you want to play the game at a decent pace. To further compare with Bone Lab, Life Alyx really forces you to play at the game's pace. You are forced to engage with scripted puzzles and encounters. You don't truly feel like you're in a world. It feels more like an escape room or a theme park, heavily restricted with what you're able to do. Sure, this lets them jam as many details as they can, as they know players will want to mess around, but instead of adding a sandbox, they just add a bunch of random props in the levels. This is really disappointing, as it can be really fun to mess around with the items, but when you the player aren't even a physical item that interacts with gravity or objects in realistic ways, adding a sandbox mode would not fix the inherent problems with the gameplay and would still feel empty. It's wild how a fully packed scene in Half-Life Alyx feels more dead and disconnected from the player compared to a rudimentary sandbox scene in Bonelab. There's something that I've glossed over throughout this video, the fact that Half-Life Alyx is only available on the Steam VR platform. That means no PSVR, no Pico, and more importantly, no Quest. This immediately cuts out almost every VR player. The most popular headsets right now are standalone, and while you can connect them to a PC, many people don't feel the need to, as the Quest 3 is getting shockingly close to PC quality. Computers are expensive, especially a good one. Add the fact that Quest 3s can be expensive as a PS5, this means that not many seasoned VR players have access to Half-Life Alyx. As annoying as the Quest takeover is for overall game quality, the influence that standalone has had on the market cannot be ignored. People who have never had a PC don't care about Half-Life, and they don't have nostalgia for the series. When the few players who do try PC VR get Half-Life Alyx, after hearing its praise as a must-play title, they, myself included, find themselves utterly disappointed in the shallow gameplay of the title. It's one thing to go and say what they're doing wrong, but what can be done to make the game better? Immediately, if you drop the Bonelab character system in this game, it immediately fixes a lot of the problems present. Yeah, I know it's not that simple, but creating a character system similar cannot be that hard for a company as large as Valve. This new player system would have full body, full physical legs and arms, you would be able to jump and be affected by gravity, you would be able to punch enemies and pick up melee weapons. This alone would be a major improvement, and I believe that it would make the game more enjoyable for me. It would be distinct from Boneworks and Lab, because those games have more open level design. Half-Life Alyx's more closed off hallway design would still work well with this new style, and could help keep the player from blitzing through everything. A sandbox mode on par with Gmod would be a big ask, but definitely doable. A sandbox mode would be a great fit, and could definitely be better than Bonelab. The props in Bonelab feel like just that, props. Half-Life Alyx's props have more interactions and actually feel like physical objects. Valve are very good with their details, and the game's details are basically unmatched. If the game was remastered with the current day's gameplay mechanics, then the game would easily be one of the best VR games ever. At the end of the day, Half-Life Alyx is a decent enough game, its graphics are still amazing today, but it takes all the safe choices in an installment of a series known for its innovation. It suffers from pacing issues that are hard to ignore. Given the game's age and flaws, there are a few reasons to go back and play it beyond nostalgia or seeing why it's so hyped up. Goodbye.